Welcome back to Behind the Screen, Swords and Sorcery Edition. I'm Marcus, joined as always by my co-host Sarah, and we have a session to get into today.
Hey everyone, and Marcus, I'll say this right up front. Listening to this one, I kept waiting for someone to catch a clean break, and it just never quite happened.
That is a very diplomatic way to put it. The through line I kept coming back to was this idea that every good outcome in this session had something unresolved still attached to it. Every win, every single one.
Which makes it tense in a specific way, right? It's not doom and gloom. The party's still standing, Beatrice is free, objectives are getting crossed off, but the costs keep landing in ways that follow people home. There's one decision in particular that I think we're going to be unpacking for a while.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. We're talking about a trust conversation that had to be handled with surgical precision, a fight that was never really about dealing damage, and a choice made alone in a room with a dying dragon that had consequences Kagun himself spelled out pretty clearly afterward.
Sometimes survival is not about finding a clean answer, it's about deciding which terrible answer you can live with.
Exactly. Let's get into it.
So let's start with that morning conversation because I think it deserves more credit than it might seem on the surface. The party has this woman who just escaped hell, who has every reason to distrust strangers, and they need information from her without triggering the one thing that would blow the whole situation up.
And the one thing they cannot say is, you are carrying a piece of the soul of the man who destroyed your life. That is sitting right there the entire conversation.
Right, so instead they do this incredibly careful dance where they are asking about Valerian, about the ceremony, about what Asmodeus did to her without ever connecting those dots out loud. And what they get back is actually more useful than if they had just led with the accusation.
Because she tells them about the blood ritual, Valerian performing what he called a blessing to help her gather followers. That is the detail that lands. That is the thread that ties her to the phylactery in the first place.
And she gave it voluntarily because they had built enough trust to ask. If Kagun opens with, "We think you have a piece of an evil lich in your soul," that conversation goes differently.
Probably badly.
Probably very badly. And the check that matters most there is not the deception roll at the start, it's the persuasion roll, where Kagun promises they will do everything they can to protect her. He rolls a 22 on that. She nods, she agrees to help, and that is the foundation everything else rests on.
Which makes what happens next almost cruel in its timing, because they barely finish building that trust before Maddie walks out of the bushes with a hellhound and a barbed devil.
Yeah, the wilderness did not care that they had just had a breakthrough.
Not even slightly. And I want to talk about the structure of that fight because listening to it back, it is not actually a standard combat. The objective the entire time is keeping Beatrice from being physically removed from the battlefield.
That is exactly right. Maddie's Chains of the Betrayer are not a damage tool. They are a recapture mechanism. The moment those spectral chains grab Beatrice and start pulling, everything the party just worked for is about to be undone.
And the responses are all positional. Kagun blasts one chain apart from range. Iranak steps into the spike growth, takes the damage, and physically grapples Beatrice to hold her against the pull. That is a strength check to stop a supernatural chain from dragging someone to hell.
And he wins it. He rolls high enough that Maddie cannot move her. So now you have this image of Iranak standing in a field of thorns, taking damage every moment he stays there, physically holding a woman against infernal chains, and somehow that's the stable outcome.
That is the plan working.
That is the plan working, yes. Meanwhile, Chib is invisible, picking apart Maddie's health from range. Kagun hexed Maddie's charisma right at the start, which limits some of her options. Indigo has Hunter's Mark on her. The whole time, the damage dealers are just methodically working through that health pool while the anchor holds.
What I keep coming back to is that Sanctuary goes on Beatrice early in the fight. That does not stop everything. Maddie has ways around it, but it forces additional saves and slows the recapture attempt just enough.
Every second of delay is a second Chib gets another shot in.
And then Iranak lands the lightning on Maddie and she is paralyzed. That is the opening. Everything the party had been doing, all the positioning and the damage and the holding, that one spell converts into a finishing window.
Chib does not hesitate. She closes the distance, she goes for the neck, and Maddie goes down with a glowing brand splitting open her chest plate.
Which is such a specific detail. It is not just a kill, it is a recall. She gets sucked into oblivion. Whatever Maddie had become, something in hell still had a claim on her.
It lands differently than a regular combat death because of that. The fight was not about defeating an enemy, it was about preventing a kidnapping. And the fact that the person they were protecting was standing there watching the whole thing, knowing it was happening because of her.
That is a lot to absorb 2 hours after seeing stars for the first time in years.
The rescue is won. Maddie is gone. Beatrice is breathing free air. And then Kagoon looks at that lava chamber and just goes across alone.
Which tactically is completely sound. The others couldn't make those jumps reliably, and bringing Beatrice through with the whole group risked losing her to a bad dice roll over a pit of lava. So the decision to use Dimension Door and go solo makes sense on paper.
Right, but what I keep coming back to is what he walks into on the other side. The dragon is already badly wounded, barely holding together, and it lays out terms that are essentially, pick one. You save her, or you save the dragon. The other one dies. And there's a catch on top of that, because whatever host you spare, that fragment has to go into a legendary item first, which then gets destroyed.
And Kagoon's inventory at that moment is not exactly overflowing with legendary options. He's got the sword. That's it.
And that sword is not just a magic weapon. That is his pact weapon. That is property of the Prince of Frost. He didn't earn it. He was entrusted with it as part of an ongoing arrangement that has kept him alive since a shipwreck dropped him in an ice glacier.
He actually explains it later on the boat in a way that I don't think the rest of the party fully appreciated in the moment. He says something like, if I lose something that belongs to him, I don't get to live. That's not hyperbole. That's the actual stakes of the deal he made.
So he's not weighing a sword against a person. He's weighing one person's life against potentially his own. And he still chooses Beatrice.
Which lands differently when you frame it that way. Because Kagoon's whole thing is the angle. He always finds the angle. He talked a soul in hell out of releasing him by asking it to admire his legs. He does not run out of angles. But in that cave, in front of a dying dragon, there was no angle, just the choice.
And what gets me is that tactical clarity you mentioned is still there. He's not falling apart. He's not monologuing about sacrifice. He just decides, spares Beatrice, hands over the sword, watches it shatter.
The dragon tearing out its own heart right after that is almost secondary to that moment, and that's saying something. Because the dragon's death is enormous, but Kagoon standing there holding a backpack with a dragon heart in it and no sword, knowing what that silence from his patron is going to mean.
And then he gets back to the boat and starts drinking, which is so consistent with who he is. But the tattoo that shows up on his arm, the one Ilara reads as debt, that's something you can't drink past.
That's the part that stuck with me. He can still cast spells, his magic still functions, but his frost abilities do nothing to that obsidian box. The Prince of Frost is not gone, he's just waiting. And Kagoon knows it.
The dream confirms it. That image of the Prince of Frost looking down with quiet disgust, not rage, disgust. And then those brands burning across him one by one, that is not a warning, that is an accounting.
And what I think the session is really doing with Kagoon here is showing that his usual mode of operating, the dark clarity, the irreverent composure, it holds through the decision. He doesn't break, but the price doesn't dissolve just because he kept it together making the call. It follows him out.
And that map is not the same one they left. I kept thinking about that detail as we were listening. The smoke billowing off the mountaintop, the ash coming down like snow. And then you get inside the infinite dungeon, and the whole first floor is just ransacked and empty. The adventurers have already cleared out. That is not a frontier anymore. That is a place people are leaving.
And Lazzaro's report confirms it. 2 months gone, West Coast overrun, Talon Watch hit, Viremon attacked, Willow's Rest, Earthglen. Those are places we have heard about since the beginning of this campaign, and now they are just on a list of compromised locations. The party emerged from hell into a region that has been actively losing ground while they were away.
Which is what makes the strategic question so messy right now, because they have this obsidian box that will not break, that is still sitting somewhere on the boat, locked, resistant to Kagoon's frost magic, and it contains a phylactery fragment. That is the thing that stops Valerian from coming back if he dies. But here's the problem. Stopping him from coming back does nothing about the army that is already out there burning cities.
Right, and I think that is the tension the party has not fully sat with yet. They have been operating on the logic that the phylacteries are the core objective, and they are not wrong, but they are solving a future problem. If Valerian falls without the vessels destroyed, he revives. Fine. But if the West Coast falls entirely while the party is chasing an indestructible box, that's a different kind of failure.
So the question is whether they play the long game or the immediate one, and I genuinely do not know where this party lands on that. Do they try to find a way to destroy the obsidian box first, which they have no current method for? Do they sail toward the Frost Pine Peaks because that is the front line and they can do something tangible there? Or do they look for Valerian directly, try to cut the head off the operation?
I think the Frost Pine Peaks angle is more complicated than it might look. The DM described the mountains as already coughing ash. That region is not just under threat from the army. The Embersooth Range itself seems to be becoming unstable. The dragon is dead now. The dungeon is evacuated. Whatever was holding that area together as a functional location is gone.
Which might be why those adventurers were leaving with their loot. They read the situation correctly.
They absolutely did. And the party's doing the opposite, sailing back toward it. But I think the harder question underneath all of this is, can a group of 4 people, however capable, actually affect the momentum of an army? Destroying phylacteries is one thing. That is a surgical strike on a specific vulnerability. Going to war is something else entirely.
And they do not have the numbers for the second option. What they do have is specific knowledge about Valerian's vulnerabilities that nobody else has. That is a real strategic asset, and it argues for staying focused on the phylactery problem rather than trying to plug holes in a coastal defense. The box is the problem I keep coming back to, because if they cannot destroy it, none of the rest of the math works.
And we do not know yet whether Alara has any answers on that front. She recognized it, she said it was hard obsidian, but that is about as far as the conversation got before everyone went to sleep. There is a possibility that someone in what remains of these cities has knowledge the party does not. A cleric, an artificer, someone who knows what that kind of construction is designed to resist.
Which would mean the next step is not necessarily a battlefield. It might be a library or a temple or a very specific person still alive in a city that's been partially overrun. Those are very different journeys.
And I think that is exactly the kind of decision point that is going to define the next stretch, because the party has options, and none of them are obviously right.
And that is really what this session kept doing, right? Every time they cleared one layer of the problem, something underneath it was still moving. They trusted Beatrice carefully, defended her ruthlessly, and Kagan made the call that cost the most. But the box is still locked. The war is still spreading. The mountain is still smoking.
What gets me is how those 3 things are actually the same pressure in different forms. The Beatrice conversation was about choosing which truth to tell and when. The fight was about who gets to decide where she goes next. And the lava chamber was Kagan deciding unilaterally that her life was worth more than his standing with the Prince of Frost. It is all the same question. How much are you willing to pay to keep one person free?
And now that question has a price tag on it, a real one. The tattoo says debt, the sword is gone, and the obsidian box is sitting in Indigo's bag laughing at them. I keep thinking about what it means that the one phylactery they cannot destroy is also the one they stumbled into accidentally. Every other step of this has been intentional. This one just showed up.
That is what I'm most curious about going forward, because they are not short of problems, but the problems have stopped being the same shape. A locked box, a widening war, a patron who is definitely not pleased, and Beatrice, who now knows most of the truth but not all of it. What happens when she finds out what was actually in her? That conversation has not happened yet.
Well, that is all the time we have for today's analysis.
Thanks for joining us on Behind the Screen, Swords and Sorcery Edition.
And remember, if someone you just met tears their own heart out and hands it to you, that is not a red flag. That is closure. Until next time.